Chapter 2 of Tales from Silver Lands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Mark Shellhammer. Tales from Silver Lands by Charles Finger, the Magic Dog. Down where the forest is so thick that the sun rarely pierces the leafy roof, where there are mosses and ferns and little plants of the brightest green, where parrots screech and thousands of little monkeys chatter in the trees, there stands a great white temple. Once, long ago, there was joy and gladness there, and flower-crowned people danced and sang. But now vines hang about the doors and window holes, and there are tall, rank weeds in the courtyard. Still, it is even now very beautiful, though sad to see. Long years before this temple was built, there lived a king, and his people loved him. And he, on his part, loved not only his people, but every flower that grew, every grass blade, and every leaf on bush and tree. Where he came from none knew, but there were those who said that he had come from the sea, not in a ship with men, but alone in a great and beautiful seashell. So they called him, in their own tongue, the king who came in a seashell. And when he went out among the people, he wore a headdress of gold-green feathers, a feather cloak of turquoise blue, and about his middle was a golden belt set with glittering precious stones. On his feet were golden sandals, and in his hand he bore a great spear of silver. The spear he carried for a sign only, for there was no fighting in those days, and it was a time when all went very well. Everyone had enough to eat and to drink and to wear, so that none had to worry about the day to come. Men loved diamonds and emeralds and rubies for their beauty, and just as they loved the sight of the tiny rainbow and a sparkling dewdrop. As for other things, corn grew so large that a single ear was as much as a man could carry, and cotton grew not only white, as we see it now, but red and blue and yellow and scarlet and black and orange and violet and green. It was the daughter of the seashell king who had taught the people how to grow colored cotton, and she, with her silky cloud of hair, was the most beautiful creature ever seen. When she walked about, the air was sweet with wonderful perfume. Birds sang with joy as though their throats would burst, and slim, drooping ferns nodded a welcome. The story of the beauty and goodness of the maiden ran through all the land, and young men who sought her hand came from far and wide. So many were her suitors that a day was set apart each week when all the people gathered to see the young men display their powers or their gifts or their clevernesses. Some would shoot with the bow, and others cast the lasso. Singers sang songs they had made, and musicians played their flutes so well that the slender boughs bent to listen. There were gifts, too, and some brought rare stones cut into the shapes of birds and animals and flowers. But not one man had touched the heart of the princess, though she was gracious to all. Now, before the king came, an evil creature of a witch had ruled the land, and she had come from the land of the shaking mud. Somehow, the seashell king had driven her away, and that she should not worry his people no more, he had set a boundary, and guards were on watch day and night to prevent her in her mischief. So she spent the day in her cave, coming out only at night to prowl about the boundary, and then only when there was no moon. Her name was Tlapa. One day there came to the king a man in rags, who said that his name was Makonaola, and the king was glad to see him, the more so because age was creeping upon the king, and he sought someone wise and brave enough to rule in his place. But no sooner had the princess looked at the stranger than she cast down her eyes, saying that he had the face of the man that she'd seen in a dream. When the king asked her questions, she said that in her dream she had followed the stranger about, had slept at his feet, had tended his fields and made his clothes. At that, her father was greatly astonished, for that his daughter should be the servant of a man who came clad in rags seemed strange indeed. The second day, Makonaola was asked if he bore gifts, but he showed his empty hands. Then, to the end that no idle or useless man should be in that land, a time was set, and Makonaola was ordered to appear before the young men and compete with them. At the test, Makonaola stood very well. When the best bowman sent his arrow into the exact center of the mark, Makonaola drew his bow and aimed so carefully that his arrow split the arrow of the other man. Nor was he less skillful with the lasso, casting his loop so that it fell about the smallest thing aimed at. It was much the same when the swiftest runner was brought. To be sure, he ran like a deer, but Makonaola ran like the wind, leaving him far behind. As for the singing contest, when the stranger sang, the very birds were hushed, and, the song being finished, a great quetzal with jet-black wings, a scarlet breast, and head and back of gold-green feathers, flew down and sat on the shoulder of Makonaola. Then a great shout went up, and all the bowmen, the lasso-throwers, the runners, and the singers came forward and greeted Makonaola, for there was no jealousy in that land, nor was there envy, and each had it in his mind to strive for that which seemed best, caring nothing for self-advancement. As for the king, being very old and tired, he was glad indeed to find a man who might become ruler in his place. So he stepped down from his high place and cast his coat made of 1,000 turquoise feathers about the stranger's shoulders. All went very well indeed, and the princess was happy to have found the man of her dreams, and the two of them loved all things, so that all things embraced and loved them. But Tlapa, the witch, with long crooked nails and black teeth and ice-like eyes, learned of all of this from the bats. Loving evil and war and violence, she was angry that another should come into the land to rule when the old king died, for she had long waited for the breath to pass from his body so that she might rule again. Seeing how the people greeted Makonaola, she became tight-lipped and slit-eyed. One night she went to Roraima, a place of rocks, where lived a wild man of terrible strength, who sat in his cave all day, crouched over a fire of smoking green wood. Over the cave fire, Tlapa and the wild man whispered long and long, while bats flapped and fluttered, and white worms crawled close to listen, for they plotted how to dispose of Makonaola. The wild man was all for dashing into the country, trampling down the guards that stood in his way, and beating the stranger with his great club of long, blunt thorns. But that Tlapa would not hear of, knowing that Makonaola could shoot an arrow that would speedily put an end to the wild man of the rocks. Far more crafty was she, remembering and telling the wild man of a strange plant that grew in the gloomy depths of a forest far away, where, because of the tangled thicket, she could never go. No sooner had the wild man learnt of the strange plant than he sprang to his feet, and with great bounds went crashing through the forest, overturning trees that stood in his way, upsetting huge rocks, splashing through swamps, and climbing a rocky precipice like a wildcat, until he came to the place where grew the evil weed. He was back again in his cave before midnight. Taking the weed, Tlapa dried it over a fire of rotten wood and crushed it into a powder. The powder she cast into the air, and, carried by the wind, it fell where the king's people lived. Wherever it fell, wherever it touched, there grew hate and suspicion, jealousy and greed. Where the dust fell on plant or flower, though there was but the slightest fleck of it, there was immediately a withering and a dying. The very corn shriveled and shrunk. Where had been flowers, there grew in a single night dense thorny tangle. The very weather changed, and the pleasant cool passed away, so that the days were hot and the nights icy cold. Some men, touched with a strange greed, laid claim to great tracts of earth, bidding others begone. And so, for the first time in that land, men quarreled and fought. Even the old king changed a little, and seeing that trouble that had come upon his land, was persuaded to believe that Maconaola was the cause. Word passed from mouth to mouth, and whispering tongues poisoned truth. And when Maconaola took his walks, grieving to see the withered flowers and fruits, people hid from his gaze. Thoughts passed to words, and words to deeds, and one day a crowd turned on Maconaola, and with sticks and stones drove him across the border and into a forest where, except for the cry of a distant bird, it was still as midnight. Sad at heart, Maconaola built a little shelter of branches and leaves, and day after day wandered alone. Nor had he living company until one day there came to him a dog, footsore and thin. The creature was hungry and weak and thorn-torn, and Maconaola took it in, washed and tended it, and shared with it his meal. And a poor enough meal it was, being of small berries and drops of tree gum and little roots. In the morning, when he went down to the stream to bathe, the dog did not follow him, and on his return, to his vast astonishment, he found in front of his house a field with growing corn and many food plants. It had grown up in less than an hour. So that evening he was full of gladness, and with his dog walked about in full enjoyment of the beautiful green earth, thankful for the humming bees and the gentle wind that moved the leaves, thankful for the only living creature that was with him. On the next day, when he returned from his stream, having left the dog sleeping in the sun, he found that his little bower of branches and leaves had been transformed to a house with furnishings all simple, clean, and bright. And around it were glorious flowers and fruits, and in the trees birds sang, and hummingbirds, looking like flashing emeralds, darted through the leaves. So again his heart was full of joy and thankfulness. The third day he made as if to go to the river, but instead turned and hid himself behind the house to watch. Then he saw the wonder, for the dog threw off its skin, and there stood the beautiful maiden whom he had known as the king's daughter. At once she set about making garments of colored cotton for him, and so rapidly she wrought that they fell from her hands like flower petals. Then she busied herself weaving a hammock of silk grass. Maconaola made no sign, but went down to the river as usual, and when he returned, the dog ran to meet him, thrusting its moist nose into his hand. But the next day again he hid, and again the dog cast off its skin, and the princess went to the garden, and to her came a cloud of hummingbirds. Swiftly Maconaola ran to the dog's skin, picked it up, and threw it into the fire, where it burned like dry leaves. Then the princess saw what had been done, and gave a great cry of joy, for the spell was broken, and Maconaola knew a fresh vigor of soul. Hand in hand they returned to the land, and the old king, seeing them coming, went out to meet them, and all the people were with him, overjoyed that Maconaola had returned, seeing the evil that had come upon them had not been removed with his departure. Overjoyed, too, were they to see the princess again, for none knew to what place she had gone, knowing only that she had vanished one evening, and at the same time a dog had run swiftly through their midst. For certainly Tlapa the witch had laid some enchantment upon her with evil design. But evil, though it may touch the good, cannot forever bind it. Wherefore the maiden resumed her own form some part of every day. There was a great meeting of all the people then, and Maconaola lost no time in seeking out the witch Tlapa, whom he killed with a silver-pointed arrow shot through her heart. As for the wild man of Roraima, it is said that, learning of the death of the witch, he dashed away in great terror, and, sinking in the shaking mud, was seen no more. But the king of the seashell made Maconaola a ruler, and on the spot where the bower had been built, and where he first saw the dog, there was erected the temple of white stone, which you may see for yourself to this day if you go to Orinoco. End of The Magic Dog.